Hey, it's Nick with B&H, and we are live here in New York City at the B&H Superstore here in our Tech Corner specifically, and today we're here to talk about this, which is Sony's brand new A9 III, which is the world's first full-frame mirrorless camera with global shutter. Now, there's a lot to talk about here, and to help me with this, we have an amazing panel here. So real quick, Mike, if you just want to introduce yourself.
How you doing? Mike Bubolo, Sony Electronics, Product Manager for Imaging Solutions.
And Jean?
Hi, I'm Jean Fruth, sports photographer, visual storyteller, and a Sony artisan of imagery.
Amazing. And we're also obviously going to be talking about the 300mm f2.8 that was just announced as well. But there is a lot to talk about with this camera. We're going to be going over some features. We're going to be going over some of the new tech. We're going to be answering questions that people have had because there have been plenty of questions about this camera already. But now, Mike, I think this first question would best be suited for you. Whenever a new camera comes out, there's obviously new features, but this one truly has a flagship, very noteworthy new feature, and that is global shutter. So, first off, a lot of people just have questions we've noticed about what global shutter even is.
Yeah.
So, would you be able to give us a quick rundown on what is global shutter and then why it's so beneficial?
Of course. I mean, and it's understandable that people don't really know exactly what global shutter is, right? Because global shutter is still very new. This is the world's first full-frame global shutter ever produced. We've seen global shutter in terms of some of our cinema cameras. 10 years ago, we had the F55, and you see it in some like really high-end security things, but never in this format, never with full frame, never with this level of performance. And what global shutter enables us to do, it enables us to do things that you just cannot do with a rolling shutter. And rolling shutter sensors have been around for 40 years, since the very beginning, since the very first sensor was made. And what that does, it reads the light from top to bottom, and it scans it. And we've been able to make that faster and faster and faster. And the Alpha 9 with the stack sensor was able to do it as fast as we possibly could, but it's never instantaneous. And when I mean instantaneous, this sensor, a global shutter, it enables you to read every single pixel, every single piece of light instantaneously. It's like comparing the speed of a car compared to teleportation. I know I said that yesterday too, but it's true. There's levels of speed, and this is just instant. And this enables us to have no distortion. This enables us to do things that you just never can do with a regular rolling shutter camera. And it changes everything. And I think we don't even know what the possibilities are yet, because we need to get this into the hands of all the creators out there and see what they can create.
Well, actually, on that note of creators, Jean, you predominantly shoot sports photography. You were telling me a little bit about that before we went live. So from your perspective, because you've been shooting Sony for a very long time, I have seen, what for you would be the advantages to global shutter in the work that you do?
Well, for sports photography, obviously, we're shooting things that move fast. And there's always the question of distortion, even as fast as the rolling shutter is. And now I'm also moving for the first time into video with my work. And that's always a question, is distortion. If you're a fast-moving train, what does that do? This takes that discussion away completely. We just don't need to talk about distortion anymore. That's a big deal.
Yeah, it's funny. So many, like, whenever a new camera comes out and there's a review of it, there's almost always a rolling shutter test. I feel like this is the first camera that will only be done maybe to show that it does not have rolling shutter, which will be interesting to see. Now, global shutter has many advantages, and we kind of spoke about just the lack of distortion, but also when it comes to flickering lights and banding, like anyone who has shot in any venue with mixed lighting can know the issue this causes. Global shutter can also help with that, right?
Yeah. There's so much in terms of banding and flicker in our world, especially with video and photography, because now we not only have artificial lights everywhere, right, where you can get banding from artificial lights. There's 8 million different types of frequencies. It's not just fluorescent and tungsten anymore, but all these LEDs. But then it goes beyond that. We're in New York City, right? You see all these LED signs that also have different refresh rates. You're at stadiums that have LED signs everywhere. So now the photographer, the videographer can photograph these athletes, can photograph their subjects, and have those signs in the background have no banding and have no distortion. And beyond that, think about virtual production, per se. It's a big thing that the world is doing right now, and they're using these massive LED walls to do virtual production, and it's always been a challenge to be able to have no banding and to be able to overcome those challenges. Well, now, having a global shutter completely overcomes that, and it's able to make production costs lower and be able to give you a lot more versatility in terms of your production. But being able to shoot stills and be able to have no banding and no discoloration or any kind of image quality loss from frame to frame is monumental. It's a big deal. So
Now, it's interesting because as the announcement of the A9 III came out, there were essentially two camps of people asking, what is global shutter? And then people who were aware of global shutter, most likely maybe cinema camera nerds like myself. But a lot of the comments that came up, I noticed, were what compromises did Sony have to make in order to get a global shutter? Because typically, the barriers of entry to global shutter are just the sheer processing power required, and you can get hits to your dynamic range as well. And there were some people speaking to what did Sony have to sacrifice for this? But I believe the Sony line was global shutter without compromise. So what does that exactly mean for the A9 III?
So I did say that. I did say that it's global shutter without compromise, and it's true because Sony's the world's largest sensor manufacturer, far and away. And we are at the forefront of creating new image technology, new sensor technology. It's not like we just created this now. We've been working on this for years and years and years. And to be able to now make a global shutter that's able to give us high dynamic range that you come to expect and need from your professional workflow, and be able to have high ISO performance that you've come to need in your professional workflow, we wouldn't have made it unless we met those standards. Because you can't come out with a camera that doesn't have those dynamic range needs, that doesn't have the high ISO range needs. And it's been harder and harder because rolling shutters have been getting as good as I think they can ever get. When you see like our 7R5 and you see the 7S3 in terms of dynamic range and high ISO, those are really tough characters to compete with. So we need to have a camera that can compete with those cameras, and we did that, and we were able to turn that impossible to possible. So it was, I'm excited to start using it a little bit more.
And can I just expand upon that a little bit? The A9 III, I'm sure many of the people seeing this have already devoured the spec sheet, but it is a 24.6 megapixel sensor, correct?
Yes. Yep.
And you were kind of speaking to how that was, to paraphrase you, the sweet spot of like the performance while still being able to get a full global shutter into the camera.
So, I mean, I still think that's true. I think it is kind of the sweet spot. A lot of people that the Alpha 9 system is designed for are shooting a lot of images. So having 24.6 megapixels is that kind of sweet spot in terms of resolution. But at the same time, it's also the sweet spot for our global shutter. I don't like it. This gives us the ability to have a sensor that gives us enough resolution. We didn't have to go down to 8 or 10 or 6, whatever it is. 24.6 is a lot. Gives us the ability to crop, gives the ability to do a lot of things. But it also is a perfect combination for high ISO performance, for dynamic range, for speed. So we're not at the point yet where we're going to be doing, well, with this camera, high resolution in a camera. So I think 24.6, for all intents and purposes, for high ISO, for performance, and for resolution is the sweet spot. It's perfect. So
now, both of you actually can attest to the fact that Sony certainly has no shortage of options for cameras you can be shooting with between the A7R line and the A9 III now and the A1. But on that note, for instance, a lot of people are also asking about the A1 now, and where does that now sit that the A9 III is out? Like, who is the audience for the A9 III versus like A7R5 versus A1?
For the people that think that 24.6 isn't enough, right? So the Alpha 1 has 50 megapixels, and it's a monster. I mean, it's 30 frames per second. It is a rolling shutter sensor, but it's the fastest rolling shutter sensor that we have. So for a lot of applications, it's great. It's very good. But if you need zero distortion, you're shooting fast action a lot, you need the ultimate in terms of shutter speeds and flash sync, then of course the Alpha 9 Mark III is for you. That's our speed camera. But the Alpha 1 is still going to be that perfect camera for many, many people. 50 megapixels, 30 frames per second is a lot. With unbelievable dynamic range, great high ISO performance, the Alpha 1 has solidified its place for many photographers. This will, don't get me wrong, this will be a tough choice for a lot of people, but the Alpha 1, I think, still has a very strong place in our lineup.
Gotcha. Now, I didn't get my hands on the A9 III until yesterday, but Jean, you got time with it a little bit before as a Sony artisan. In the time that you had with it, because you shot some baseball, I believe, there was a very, very snazzy sizzle reel that Sony put together before the presentation, and awesome. Jean was in it. Yeah. Were there shooting situations where you, that kind of made you think that you would go to an A9 III as opposed to any of the previous Sony cameras you shot with? Like, is it like once you use the A9 III, can you not go back? Or what was your shooting experience like in both yesterday and then when you got to shoot with it a little bit earlier?
I mean, for me, it's obvious because I'm a sports photographer. If you want to capture an athlete at peak moment and you have an opportunity to have 120 frames per second, I mean, why wouldn't you want that, right? Because you don't want to miss. There's no do-overs. You don't get to say, can you slide into home again? Can you leap up and catch that ball again? It just doesn't work that way, right? It's one and it's done. So why wouldn't I want that? And so, yeah, it was really obvious to me. I'm shooting peak action, and you don't always need 120 frames per second, but that's what's so great about the burst, right? So I can set the camera for 30 frames per second. That's what I like to shoot my action at. But then when there's a moment, when peak action's coming, you hit the burst and you get what you need and you don't miss. That's it.
You actually brought up two beautiful segues into other things I want to talk about, which is, first off, yes, this camera can shoot at 120 frames per second. And one question I actually had, because I just wanted to make sure I didn't misrepresent it, is that RAW only, or could you do RAW and JPEG at 120?
120 is without limitations. It's 120 frames per second in 14-bit RAW plus JPEG, extra fine JPEG.
And full autofocus, full auto exposure.
Full autofocus, full auto exposure, 120 frame per second autofocus and exposure. So it's without compromise. And you're going to be able to do it for 1.6 seconds for 196 frames, giving you, if you did the RAW plus JPEG, that's 6 gigabytes per second, which is crazy amount of data. So,
and then the other thing you had mentioned, Jean, was the speed boost function, I'm assuming, when you can, which once I started playing with it, once I kind of got the muscle memory to start using it, it's going to be difficult to go back, because essentially what it lets you do is you can set whatever frame, like if you want to shoot at 20 frames per second, let's say, then C5 is the button, correct, by default. You hold that down, and you can then go into a boost mode, speed mode, boost mode. I want to make sure I'm...
Speed boost.
Speed boost. I was so close. You can go to that mode and switch to 120 frames per second if you want. So if you have the golf player just about to swing, right when they do that, that's when you can hold that down and then shoot that 120 frames per second. But I had a question that you were actually able to answer immediately before this live stream. I was curious if you could customize that, because 120 photos in a second is a lot to sift through in the edit. But you can change that if you don't want it to. If you don't want the speed boost to always be 120.
Exactly right. So a lot of people obviously are hung up on 120 frames per second because it's the first time that you're able to do such high frame rates at without the compromise. But you don't always need 120 frames per second. And what's cool about speed boost is that forever, when Alpha 9 came out and we're shooting 20 frames per second, you'd always have to put it in 20 frames per second to get that advantage.
Yeah.
So now you don't have to put the camera into 120 to be able to get that advantage. I can be shooting, like Jean said, at 20 frames per second or 30 frames per second for my normal boost, for my normal shot. And without taking my finger off that shutter, I can just press that speed boost mode and then go up to 120 frames per second. Or, without having the most extreme example, you can go, let's say I'm in the studio and I want to shoot at 5 frames per second, and then I can speed boost to 20.
Yeah.
I can go down if I wanted to and use the speed boost button the other way, but that's an anomaly that I don't know. But, I mean, I'm going to do it here. So you're going to be shooting and never taking my finger off that shutter.
Yeah.
Be able to know that, traditional gameplay, I'm shooting at 20 frames per second, and then as soon as I see that ball about to hit the bat, as soon as I see that ball hitting the racket or whatever it may be, or that peak action is happening, I can make sure that I'm not going to miss it because I have that speed boost for 120 frames per second. I don't have to just sit here and, mash at 120 frames per second. So
yeah, and I don't know if we mentioned it, but we should mention fully blackout-free shooting as well.
Fully blackout-free, yep, absolutely.
And that's a result of the global shutter, correct? Because there's nothing to...
Yeah, I mean, we've come close to blackout-free on other ones, and we're milliseconds away, but this is complete blackout-free, uninterrupted view. So what you're seeing with your eye is what you're seeing through the viewfinder, so you can track your action the way you normally do with your eyes.
Now, another thing that is a first for Sony, I believe, is pre-capture?
Yes, so for us, pre-capture, to me, is one of those things that changes the way you shoot, because no matter how fast we are, you might miss the shot. So, and not putting it on the photographer, but also there's times where your subject is really unpredictable. So what I'm doing is, so as I'm half pressing that shutter button down, or I'm using the AF on button or whatever custom button I set up, it's constantly capturing images while I'm just half pressing it. It's capturing and throwing away, capturing and throwing away. But then as soon as I press the shutter, it's going to capture everything after I press the shutter, and then everything before I press the shutter up to a full second, up to 120 frames per second.
Yeah.
But more realistically, you can set it to whatever frame rate you want, let's say 30 frames, and you can do it for about a quarter of a second. I mean, you can go as far as a second and 120 frames, so you really make sure you're not going to miss it. But this gives you the ability to not miss. And what's interesting is in our event yesterday where a lot of people were shooting and they were playing with the cameras, they'd come over and they'd be like, oh my gosh, look at this shot that I just got. And when you're playing it back, you see a little icon on the screen that shows you that it was pre-capture. And I was like, you know that was pre-capture. You wouldn't have got that without pre-capture. Like, what? And it happened like 4 or 5 times, and everyone's like, oh my God, I would have missed that shot if I didn't have pre-capture on. And it helps us. It makes sure that you don't miss the moment. And all of these things together, the global shutter, the 120 frames per second, the speed boost, and this, I can't say you can't miss, but it's harder now.
The camera does everything it possibly can to make sure you don't miss. Jean, were you able to use the pre-shutter at all, like either in the initial event you had with it or yesterday?
Yeah, the pre-capture, I didn't really have a chance to fully experience it, but I already know how it's going to change how I'm going to shoot. Like, so I'm excited to really dive in. So I can't speak to it as much as I'm excited about it, because it will. I mean, what Mike's saying is when you think about these changes, it's going to change the way we shoot. And that's cool. You know, it's going to allow us to be more creative. It puts creativity to the forefront because the camera is doing this incredible work. That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, actually, on that note as well, of just enabling you to do things that were either impossible or difficult before, I think we also have to talk about the maximum shutter speed you can get with this, as well as flash sync, because this can shoot at 1/80,000th of a second shutter speed.
Yeah.
And not only that, but it can flash sync at any shutter speed, including that 1/80,000th of a second.
80,000.
Yes. Yes, we need to clarify.
1, 2, 3, 4 zeros.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the fastest shutter speed of any camera out there right now, right? So 80,000th of a second can freeze anything. I'm pretty sure, not anything. You can't ever say anything, but it can freeze almost anything that you can throw at it, and it gives the ability to do things in freeze action different than you've ever done before. And when things are moving that fast, it works in conjunction with global shutter, because if something's moving that fast, no matter how fast your shutter is, if you have rolling shutter, it's also going to have distortion. So this fixes both those things.
Yes.
And like you said, with flash sync, this is where, you know, we had the biggest round of applause. This is where people got really excited, because flash sync at any and all shutter speeds, including 80,000th of a second, just changes everything. And at this point, keep in mind, we're at 16,000th of a second when shooting in continuous. But we'll talk about it later. But we did mention in the firmware, we'll be able to do 80,000th of a second, even in continuous shooting, really quickly. So, but this gives us the ability to do things also with flash that we didn't know the flashes were capable of, because the limitation's always been the camera and the sensor, not the flashes. So now the camera can move at the speed of light with the flash and be able to capture at faster frame rates and capture action and still things that we never thought possible.
Camera moving at the speed of light would have also been a really good tagline for this camera. But I feel like that we also might need to assuage one fear that people had, where with the shutter speed and with the global shutter, the worry that you can't get motion blur now in a photo if you want to. But can you speak to that as well, just to kind of clarify what that means?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, the global shutter is just reading the pixels at the speed of light. It's reading the pixels all instantaneously. But your shutter speed is still completely independent from that. Like your parameters of exposure, right? Your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO are still yours. It's just the sensor readout speed is just different. So those are all completely independent. All the creative options that you had traditionally with cameras are still there. Global shutter doesn't affect your shutter speed at all. So.
And another thing that came up was also just third-party flashes, using them with this camera, because some people were curious if these maximum shutter speed flash syncs only work with Sony brand, or if you can get anyone.
No, we didn't want to limit people. So, I mean, of course, with Sony flashes, first and foremost, the global shutter enables us to get rid of high-speed sync. Gone are the days for cameras to need high-speed sync. Well, global shutter cameras, or I guess camera, to have no need for high-speed sync, because it used to be that the rolling shutter needed to be compensated by the flash, because the flash is great, but it needed to pulse in order for the sensor to read out fast enough. But now you can use TTL and get rid of high-speed sync and shoot in any power on your Sony flash, and they'll be able to sync perfectly. But to your point, you don't always want to use a Sony flash. You want to be able to use your strobes. You want to be able to work in a studio. So even with third-party flashes, you're able to have sync speeds at any shutter speed. And now the thing is, flash moves so quickly that sometimes the shutter and the wireless transmitter from the third parties may not sync down to the millisecond. So we can actually go in and we can change the camera to move and overcome that. So you can actually move in millisecond increments to be able to coordinate and sync your flash with the wireless trigger of your third-party flash. So that way you can be rest assured that you're going to be able to have the workflow that you need to and get the performance you need to, even with third-party flashes. So
that's amazing. Now, one thing we can't neglect, if you're just watching the live stream, this might kind of look like your standard Sony mirrorless camera body, but there were some design upgrades to it as well, because you've been holding this beautiful camera this whole time. We haven't even had to talk about it.
No, I just don't want to let go. So it's fine. Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about just some of the changes to the design?
Yeah. So every iteration, every time you see the Mark II, the Mark III, Mark IV, Mark V now, right? So we always hear feedback from professionals that use it more than anyone, and to hear what they would want better, what they feel like, where the button placements are, where the ergonomics are. So this camera gives us the best ergonomics that we've had in a camera. We really changed the way that it feels. We've even changed the way the shutter placement is, so it's a little bit more in front of the camera as opposed to right on top. We've even changed the actual shutter mechanism itself to be able to accommodate pre-capture a little bit better and to be able to accommodate that feel and just make it a little bit more tactile. Another thing we've talked about already, but that custom button in the front, we've changed the dominance of the custom buttons. These are all custom, these dials here. And then, of course, we mimic all this on the grip as well. So the same exact ergonomics you have vertically, you have horizontally, or the other way around, but whatever. And even having the custom button in the front, even having these custom dials in the back, and the exact same placement of the shutter, and the exact shutter is in the grip as it is on the camera itself. So it just makes a really pleasurable experience when you're shooting it, with a lot less fatigue when you're out there shooting all day.
It was actually in the note, Jean, you have years and years of shooting experience with Sony cameras. Did you notice a difference in like just how this camera felt compared to previous ones?
When I was hand holding all day yesterday and playing with it, and yeah, it felt very comfortable. You know, I think I didn't use it with the grip, and I usually don't use a grip, so I like doing it without it. That's the way I prefer to shoot. But yeah, certainly comfortable and obviously lightweight, which is important to me.
Yes. So actually, on the note of lightweight, I feel like now we have to talk about this other beauty sitting on the table, the 300mm f2.8, which was also announced, because I got some time to play with this new lens as well. It's Sony's newest G Master. Kind of completes the telephoto lineup now as well, right?
Yeah.
At long last. But I shot with this exclusively handheld, and I was able to shoot with the A9 III paired with it as well, and it was a very portable setup. Jean, as a sports photographer, have you been able to kind of see the change in terms of using telephoto lenses where like a tripod or monopod is necessary to the point where you can now kind of handhold, or have you always been able with Sony cameras to just kind of shoot handheld however you need to?
Yeah, it's so I think this 300 should be named after me. It's,
is it too late to change that?
This is my lens. I just want everybody to know that. It's I've been waiting for this lens, and it's what's been missing focal length wise for me, and it'll be in my bag every single time, because of course I'm shooting with a 400 professional sports, but there are times that I need to step back and I need that space, and that 300, having a 300 that's a 2-weight, so I'm getting the speed and the beautiful bokeh and everything that I need, but in a 300, super important. And what does it add? Well, hand holding for me for the first time, a lens like this, and I did it all day yesterday to see what it was going to be like, and it was just terrific. And the big deal, right, besides, well, the lightweight, you know, and how it feels comfortable all day long. So the combination of the new camera with this 300 2.8, but I'm able to put the camera on the ground. And with the work that I do, and most sports photographers, we're trying to make our subjects look heroic. And how do you make a subject look heroic? You put the camera on the ground.
Yes.
You pull the screen out, and now with a 300, I'm able to put the camera on the ground, and it's a game changer.
It's funny that it's almost an in-joke that we throw the word game changer around so often, because whenever any new tech comes out, it's a game changer. But genuinely, as you know, between the lens and the camera, like you can now say that this can do something that previous cameras could not do.
Yeah.
But it does inherit some features from other full-frame Sony mirrorless cameras as well in terms of autofocus performance and in-body image stabilization. This can get up to 8 stops of stabilization just in the body alone, correct?
So the camera, just by itself, 8-stop stabilization. And of course, and with that sweet spot sensor, the 24.6,
Yes.
I mean, you're able to shoot at about 1/8 of a second. So it gives you a little bit more versatility in terms of the light shooting, in terms of longer exposure shooting, and to be able to get that shot even if the light doesn't agree with you. And of course, it also works in conjunction with the lens-based stabilization. So when you're using both together, you're able to get not just the 8 stops, but also get a much nicer, more stable field of view through the viewfinder. So that way you can track your action much easier. You're just going to be able to have a much better experience when they're combined together. But I mean, the in-body stabilization is reached a point where it's really, the effectiveness affects your shooting and your day-to-day. So
Yes. And then autofocus performance as well. This is latest and greatest. But is it body pose estimation? What is the AI boosted feature?
It was Creative Space, Sony's Creative Space just last year where we introduced the 7R5. And the 7R5 introduced a dedicated AI processing unit. And that introduced to the world a different way of subject recognition in autofocus. And this takes it to another level. This is our best subject recognition, our best autofocus that we've ever had in a camera. And when you have that designated processor, you're able to process a lot more data. So you can do subject recognition a lot better to go beyond just seeing a face, beyond an eye, and have human pose estimation.
Yes.
And whatever that means is that I don't need to see a face to be able to get autofocus. Like you can see in the videos, someone's wearing glasses or goggles, or they're moving really quickly in the frame and moving out of the frame and in the frame. It's still able to recognize that eye and track it everywhere it goes. And I know I talk about the human pose estimation because most of what we shoot is people. But when it comes to animals and when it comes to birds, the performance is just, I always say this, but it does feel like cheating because it is kind of cheating because you can just let the camera do whatever you want. Set it to wide, you're getting the shot. It's tracking that pupil of the eye everywhere it goes. I can worry about my composition. I can worry about where I am. I can worry about my environment and my subject. I don't have to sit there and worry about the technology because it works so intelligently and so well that it's by far and away the best autofocusing system you've ever used. So.
Well, Gina, I was actually curious just because, once again, you are so experienced with this. Do you have, when you're shooting with Sony, default autofocus settings that you found work especially well when you're trying to capture incredibly fast action, balls moving back and forth across the field, people's faces? What do you use?
My go-to for most action will be tracking expanded when I'm shooting with the A1. And so there's similar settings, but just a little bit, it's more improved and a little bit more refined. So working with it, it felt the same to me, but it was locking on. I didn't have, just for the time that I was shooting with it, and I shot basketball yesterday, and they were jumping in front of each other, and I stayed on my subject the whole time. And so, yeah, it's the same. Is it called tracking expanded, Mike? Is it the same?
Expandable spot, yeah.
Yeah,
Perfect,
yeah,
so.
And that's my go-to because subjects move in front of each other, and it stays on the subject I need it to.
Yeah, no, when you get when I shoot with Sony and you go through the menu system and you're just drowning in options for like autofocus. Do you want like animal detection? Do you want to focus on the eye? Do you want wide tracking? Do you want there's so many options that you're almost like a kid in a candy store, and especially when you let us play around in Chelsea Piers with like 5 different sports happening,
yeah.
It's like I don't even know what to choose.
Speaking of focusing spots, did you see that we have extra small and extra large focusing spot?
I did see that, yes.
And now you can even customize your own spot. So you can make it just a sliver on the bottom of the screen, and I can sit there and I can make it wider, I can make it taller, I can make it bigger, and you can make your own custom spot. You want extra small? Sure. You want to make it elongated the whole width of the screen? Go for it. It's awesome.
Mike was showing me right before we did the live stream just how you can manipulate it. If you just want like a 3-pixel tall rectangle across the bottom, you can make that if that's your jam.
Did you see this? It's awesome.
Yeah. Also, while we're talking about the camera body, you have the battery grip on it as well. Yep. And this does have a couple of tweaks compared to previous battery grips in terms of like how it manages battery efficiency.
Yep. So now it does. We've always been able to carry 2 batteries in the grip, and of course, the way that we used to do it, one battery would drain and then it would go to the next battery. And it was great. It was fine. but now we do parallel power. So it sees both batteries as one big battery, essentially, even though you see the power on the screen. But what this does, doing parallel power, gives us much better battery life when you're using the grip than we would doing it the other way. So now you're going to get up to like 15% better battery life when using the grip. So it nice little peak performance. It's not so bad. So.
No, I mean, look, every little bit counts when you're trying to like squeeze as much battery life out as you can. Now, one thing we haven't really talked about yet is video, because that's a whole other aspect to what the global shutter can help improve. And Jean, I know you were saying you were thinking of pivoting a little bit more to video as well. I feel like the benefits to global shutter for video are a little bit more of a known quantity, but still, I think it's worth chatting about how, like, if you are whipping the camera around, you no longer have to worry about that jelly effect going back and forth. But are there any other benefits in the A9 III for video performance in a global shutter?
So, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, having no distortion in video is the benefit, right? Because, and to your point, we've seen cameras without with global shutters and video, because that's the market that really saw the need for it. Because there's nothing worse than, you've heard the term jello effect, you've heard rolling shutter. To your point, you've always seen these rolling shutter tests. So to be able to have the advantage of having absolutely no distortion in video changes things. To be able to be moving in a safari truck or a train and be able to be passing another train and have those lines be perfectly straight is something that videographers and cinema makers and video and creators have always been striving for, because there's nothing worse than getting that moment and being able to have this moment and then seeing your lines skewed and seeing things all distorted. So the advantage in video, some would argue, is even more important than stills, but that's from videographers. Stills photographers will say the other way, so it's just important all around. But
Jean, did you get a chance to shoot any video at either event with the A9 III?
No, I haven't shot video yet. We've been talking about it a lot, and I saw a lot of team photographers and sports photographers here yesterday, and we were just talking about how having one camera that can do both without compromise is a big deal for a lot of people. And even for my new project, the idea that I can, because stills are always going to be near and dear to my heart, so I'm going to always be a still photographer first, but video is now my new world, and being able to, I'm excited with the idea that I could shoot still, switch to video, and not have a compromise, and get everything that I need in both. And for a lot of the friends that I were here yesterday and that I'm working with, whether they're team photographers or they have projects, they have to shoot stills and video. They have to go back and forth. That's the job. I mean, where we are, when you're shooting, you have to switch from stills to video. So having one camera that can do both without compromise and without distortion, it's exciting.
So is this going to become your new go-to camera once we can finally get our hands on it in the spring, tentatively?
Yeah, as a sports photographer at 120 frames per second, yeah, you bet.
I think we'll be able to hook up Jean before that.
I would hope so. Very quickly, because I meant to address this when we were talking about flash photography. I just wanted to circle back. Just a quick question, because I don't believe we discussed third-party flashes. Did we? Wait, did we discuss that?
We did.
Cool, we did. I just wanted to make sure that we'd addressed that you can use everything and whatever you want to use with that. I think actually now we might be able to get into just a few quick questions that people have started to have with the camera. One of them was the camera body. Well, actually, we should probably discuss I/O before we get to this. Just in terms of what you're getting with this, it seems pretty similar to the A9 II. You're getting PC Sync, you're getting RJ45 port, you're kind of getting the usual.
Yep. And now we're up to 10 gigabits per second transfer speed via the LAN and via the, so it's about almost 4 times faster than what you had with the Alpha 9 Mark II, because as you know, a lot of people shooting with the Alpha 9, we have a lot of agency partners, we have a lot of photojournalists that are out there capturing the world for us, and they need to transfer those images as fast as they possibly can.
Yep.
So we're having 4 times faster wireless transfer, we have the LAN, we have the USB-C at 10 gigabits per second. So things are upgraded. Even little things like how the doors open and how you're able to access the door, access all the ports are improved and based off of feedback from everybody. So even that workflow portion of it is improved. So
no, that's amazing. And And then kind of on the note of I/O, this kind of takes the standard Sony dual SD card slot and CF Express Type A. One question people had, though, was were there any limitations to either photography or video modes of something you could only shoot on CF Express versus SD card? Are there any other limitations in terms of...
I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because you hear 120 frames per second, you hear of all this speed, people are like, well, now I have to invest in all these memory cards, I have to invest in CF Express Type A. And don't get me wrong, it does have dual memory card slots, CF Express Type A and SD card slots, but you can do everything in stills with SD card as you can with CF Express Type A.
Yeah.
Now, you're going to get a humongous advantage in performance when it's recovering from the buffer, so it's much, much, much faster with CF Express Type A because the cards are just that much faster. Now, the only thing you need CF Express Type A for is if you're shooting slow and quick, 120 frames per second, all eye. And that's the one feature where you just have to use CF Express Type A and can't use SD card. But if I recommend everyone get CF Express Type A because you're going to get the best performance of the camera, you're going to have a better performance. But in a pinch, sometimes we need SD cards. We have them probably in every one of our little pockets when we're out there in the field just in case as emergency cards.
Yeah.
Use them, so you're fine.
Because you also mentioned the buffer. I don't know if we discussed what the buffer is on this, depending on your shooting mode. So if you are, let's say, the maximum shooting rate, what buffer can we expect?
So at 120 frames per second, you're limited to about 196 frames, 192 frames. I forgot which one it was. Don't hold me to that. But and otherwise, you just have a massive buffer. So I don't know the exact number. We don't have real-time tests, and it changes based off of some of your shooting settings and things like that. But for the most part, you can shoot as long as you want. And even as it's recovering, you're able to obviously shoot. There's no disabling of the camera at that point, and it recovers, like I said. I mean, with the CF Express Type A card, when I shoot 196 images, it's recovering in mere seconds. So you're able to go and just do it again and recover and do it again. So.
No, I can attest to that. When I was doing the speed boost, you just give it a second or two, and I was able to shoot again. And then, of course, the standard question is always battery life. It has so much new tech in it. Is this going to impact battery life compared to, say, like the A1 or some of Sony's other flagships?
It's a really good question because we're utilizing a lot of the same hardware as the Alpha 1. Like it's a 9.44 million dot OLED screen, even though we're doing it at a faster frame rate. We also have the advantage of just newer technology. So we're getting about the same battery life as the Alpha 1. We're getting better battery life than the Alpha 9 Mark II. And especially like when I said, when you're using the grip, you're getting much better battery life out of the batteries that are in the grip. So in essence, depending on how you're shooting, it's either going to be the same or a little bit better. So.
Yep. One other question, and if you don't know the answer, that's totally fine. But we got to do one question like that. I noticed that when we were shooting with them, the minimum ISO was 250.
Yep.
I believe it's usually 100 on previous ones. Was there a reason for that, or?
That is one of the things that Global Shutter enables us to do. Is we have to start at 250 to the second. I don't know the exact answer. I can find out, and I can let everybody know, and I'll comment in the live feed chat. But once I find out, I'll let everybody know. But as of right now, I do believe it's because of the Global Shutter.
Gotcha. We appreciate your due diligence. Yeah. And then the other fun question I'm sure you always love to answer is questions about overheating. Is there anything people should be aware of? Are there any modes where you might expect that? Or?
That one I know. We're good. So the overheating is fantastic. We've been getting better and better at this. You've seen designated heat sinks in our cameras. So this, when you're shooting, you're going to get better heat sink than you do in the Alpha 1. You're going to get a much better heat sink than you did in Alpha 9 Mark II. You're going to be able to shoot up to an hour and a half, sometimes even longer, depending on your shooting situation and how many megabits per second you're shooting. But it's a beast. You're going to be able to shoot for a long time. The Global Shutter doesn't create as much heat as people would rightfully think that you would think that it would produce a lot more heat. But our heat sink is very, very good in this camera. So.
And we touched upon it a little bit earlier, just like the worry about dynamic range being impacted because of the Global Shutter. But what is the actual dynamic range on the A9 III?
We didn't disclose the dynamic range in my own testing and like people's testing already. I mean, we could put the hands in some really well-known testers yesterday.
Yes.
So, and they've already done their tests, and we're having really stellar results in terms of high dynamic range and high ISO performance. So
gotcha.
It's really well, but we don't ever really disclose that. We just let you guys do it. Yes. You won't believe us anyway. So
I know we get to have fun with that. Yesterday was wild. It was like my entire YouTube homepage was here at this event.
It's true.
It was really fun to see. And then also, just because Global Shutter is new, people have questions about. Sony's obviously very well known for its low light performance.
Yep.
How does the A9 III stack up compared to the other flagships?
It's subjective, but in my own performance and from what I've heard now from a lot of high-end shooters, it's fantastic. I mean, it's right there with the Alpha 1, probably a little bit better than the Alpha 1. No offense to the Alpha 1.
You heard it here first.
And it's better than the Alpha 9 Mark II. So we're getting just fantastic high ISO performance. Yesterday, you know, ping pong, table tennis, whatever you want to call it, people are shooting it, and they wanted to get the fastest possible shutter speed. And we're talking about how fast these shutter speeds can be. Well, you're going to have to bump up your ISO. And they were shooting at, 50,000, 25,000. Perfect. Like, it was beautiful. And then, of course, the ping pong was perfectly round, but that's the distortion thing. So.
Yes. And you kind of answered this before, but a lot of other people are saying, like, who buys the A1 now? But you had mentioned kind of where that camera still has advantages, especially with just sheer megapixels. Is
sheer
that kind of...
Yeah, I mean, it's megapixels. It's 8K, of course.
Yes.
I mean, there's a huge market for that camera. As you know, like, it's one of the best-selling professional cameras out there, and it really does come down to resolution, and it comes down to 8K. If you need resolution, or you need 8K, or you need both, that's why we make multiple cameras. So
amazing. Yeah. And then, Jean, I was curious for you, does this camera kind of address any lingering, I don't even want to say issues, but just like things where as a Sony shooter you would say, like, oh, this is nice, but it would be nicer if it had this. Does this camera address a lot of those, or are there any other features that you appreciated on it that we haven't chatted about yet?
I mean, I can't say that it addresses any particular problems, but I would say that what it does is just open up possibilities that weren't possible before. Did I just say it like that? Yeah. We'll be able to make pictures that we weren't able to make before, and that's what I'm most excited about it. You know, Mike talks the technical side, but when I think about it, and I think about all the creators out there, and when this gets into creators' hands, what they're going to be able to make is so exciting to me. The pictures I'm going to be able to make that I haven't been able to make before, and what they're going to make, and I just can't wait to see it. My friends who shoot safaris, just what they're able to capture and how they're able to capture it, that's what's exciting.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about, I know you probably won't be able to get the A9 III for this, but you were telling me about some of the places you're just traveling to in the immediate future. You're going to, where was you going again? It was.
I've got a pretty busy travel schedule. I'm going to Uganda, and then followed by Cuba, followed by South Korea. Yeah, it's busy.
And that was part of the nonprofit, you said?
Yeah, it's part of it. It's grassroots baseball, and our new initiative for the next 3 years is we're telling the stories of women in baseball, girls and women on the field, off the field, around the globe. And just being able to, I have to travel small and light, and so that 300 lens is kind of the perfect ticket for places like that, where, a 400 is going to be overkill for me for some of those trips, but being able to bring that and put my camera on the ground and just all the possibilities. So yeah, for me, having this product come out, having the camera come out and this lens for the timing for my project is, I'll thank Sony for that one. So.
Well, you called it the 300 lens. It's the Jean lens now, remember?
It's the Jean lens.
It
is.
The signature
on B&H's website.
Yeah.
You have to look
there's
for
still
that
time. We can do this.
Yes.
Yeah. Just please write in, sign the petition. We want
throw the
Jean
link below
lens.
for the petition.
Okay.
Wow. I mean, I'm trying to even rack my brain about anything else that we didn't chat about. There was, personally, the speed boost was such a just obvious thing that was so nice to actually play with. My only regret was that I didn't have more time to play with it. We were in Chelsea Piers, which had a lot of great action and sports photography to shoot. But I'm very curious to see, kind of like what you were saying, Jean, of just what is possible to shoot with this, because we haven't really had a stills camera full frame mirrorless with a global shutter before. Now, this is, I know, spring 2024 is the tentative date.
So spring 24 is a very conservative estimate, but giving ourselves a little room, maybe we can over-deliver on that, so that'll be nice.
Under-promise, over-deliver.
But, yeah, so spring 2024 for both the lens and the camera, both coming in right now. I guess we won't say prices. It's a live
Amazing. Well, I think.
Firmware updates.
Oh yes.
We got
Thank you
we
for
did
that
so
little
much yesterday. It's hard to remember everything.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, well, yes. So not only are you getting a new Sony mirrorless camera, not only are you getting a new G Master lens, there's firmware updates now for the A1, was it A7S3 and A9 III?
And we already announced one for the Alpha 9 III.
Yes.
So, and just quickly, I didn't want to.
No, please, absolutely.
But, you know,
you've
I
earned
like
these
to geek
accomplishments.
out.
Talk about them.
And so many people have questions about the firmware updates. We've heard so much. And I like to say that we listen. This one took us a long time to listen, but we were hearing. It just took us a long time to implement, but it's here. And we announced that the Alpha 1's going to have updates. It's going to have breathing compensation, other playback options, FTP options, ITPC. Alpha 7S3 is going to get DCI 4K 24p and breathing compensation. But beyond just the firmware updates, and of course the Alpha 9 Mark III is going to get 80 thousandths of a second in continuous shooting, but we talked about that. We're also announcing that we're going to have C2PA authentication. So you're going to be able to have authentication for copyright, and you're going to have authentication for image authenticity, starting with firmware updates starting in 2024 as well, because I think that's obviously a problem that we all have to address. And as an image maker, as Sony being one of the leaders in the industry, I think it's up to us to come together and figure out some solutions. So I'm happy to see that in 2024 as well.
No, that's great.
Uh-oh, we got am I gonna get
A news report has just been handed to me. No, just one final question about durability and weather sealing.
Yep.
Because this camera, you were talking about all the bells and whistles with that, but if you could just speak to what we can expect from that.
So we've been making tough cameras. I mean, Jean can attest to this more than even I can. But they're magnesium alloy. They're dust and weather resistant. It keeps up to the rigors of every single day, everyday use and abuse, because that's what we do, right? If the camera's not being abused, you're not using it enough. So it can keep
That's
up
another
to what we
great
do.
quote you can use for your advertising.
But the lens too, it's magnesium alloy chassis. It's dust and moisture sealed, so it keeps up to and what you've come to expect from an Alpha 1, even more so than an Alpha 9 Mark II, etc. So this camera is grown in terms of what it's able to do in dust and moisture resistant, even when it comes down to double painting the glass in the viewfinder, so it's less likely to fog and less likely to get anything else. It's just a durable camera. And now we don't even have a moving shutter, so you don't need it, so it's even more durable.
And that weather sealing applies to the new G Master 2, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No, that's it's completely dust and moisture sealed, magnesium alloy chassis. It's a beast. You know, it's so light. It's incredibly well built. So.
Wouldn't expect anything less from a Jean lens.
Yeah.
So we have talked about a lot, and obviously, this is just the first 24 hours of this camera, being known. So there's going to be a lot more to discuss. There's going to be a lot of, kind of like what you were saying, Jean, it's just going to be interesting to see what people can do with a global shutter stills video hybrid camera, essentially. But if you are interested in learning more, you can check out B&H's website. We also just did a full YouTube sort of first look at it. But other than that, I think that about wraps it up. I just really want to thank you both so much for being here and lending your expertise to this.
Yeah.
I want to thank Sony for providing the cameras and for inviting us to the event. Also Sennheiser for the microphones that we were using. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. Once again, thank you guys so much. I'm Nick with B&H, and we will see you sometime soon.
Thanks, everybody.